I was sitting on the edge of my bed at 4 in the morning, trying to decide if I was going to sleep or just get up. It had been 16 months of back-to-back shifts, nights, days, weekends, whatever they needed. I'd stopped sleeping somewhere along the way, not all at once. At first I'd sleep 4 hours and call it enough, then 3. Then I'd lie down and watch the room get light through the blinds. My hands had started shaking too. Not constantly, just when I needed them to be steady. Pouring coffee, signing a form, picking up the radio. It was like my body had decided those were all emergencies. The chest thing came later. I'd walk toward an ambulance and my chest would seize up. Not pain exactly. More like everything inside me locked tight and forgot what it was supposed to do. I'd stop beside the rig and wait for it to pass while somebody else loaded the bags. That didn't work for long. The call that finished it came at 3 in the morning. I don't remember the address. I remember the bathroom. It was a small bathroom with pale blue walls and a plastic shower curtain covered in little yellow flowers. The boy was in the bathtub. He was already dead when we got there, but I started compressions anyway because that's what you do when somebody's mother is standing there screaming and you haven't been told to stop. His skin was cold. The water had been drained out, but there was still some pooled around the plug. My knees were on the tile and my hands kept pressing down on his chest. His mother screamed his name. "Trevor!" She wasn't talking to me. She was screaming at the whole room. At the boy. At God, maybe. I don't know. I kept doing compressions. Somebody behind me said something about the monitor. I don't remember what. The bathroom smelled like bleach and wet towels. The shower curtain kept brushing against my shoulder every time I leaned forward. The boy didn't come back. He was dead before I touched him. I knew that. Everybody there knew it. That didn't make it easier to stop. After that call, I couldn't get back in an ambulance. I tried for a few more shifts. I made it as far as the bay once and had to turn around. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys. Another time, my chest seized before I even opened the door. Then I stopped showing up. There were forms and phone calls and people asking me questions I didn't know how to answer. I didn't tell my family what had happened. I didn't tell the people I'd worked with either. There wasn't a good way to explain that I'd spent 16 months running toward bad situations, and then one night, my body decided it was done. So I left the apartment before sunrise. I didn't have much to pack. A few shirts, some jeans, work boots, a jacket, and the things I'd collected. The place looked almost the same after I'd cleared it out. That was the strange part. I'd expected it to look abandoned, but it mostly looked like I'd just gone to work and might come back later. I stood in the kitchen with a cardboard box in my hands and looked at the coffee maker. I didn't take it. There was no reason to. I wasn't even sure where I was going. I put the box down and went back to the bedroom. My phone was on the floor beside the mattress. The screen said 4 in the morning. I'd checked it a few minutes earlier and it hadn't helped. I opened the state jobs board. I'd been looking at it for days. Not seriously. Just scrolling through listings because it was something to do when I couldn't sleep. Most of the jobs needed experience I didn't have or wanted somebody who could fix machinery, manage people, or live somewhere that had a normal road leading to it. Then I saw the caretaker position. It was at a dark sky preserve outside Alkeny, Oregon. The listing said the work involved checking permits, keeping the light domes low, and locking the observation gate at dusk. There was an old ranger cabin included with the job. I read it twice. The cabin part got me. I didn't want an apartment. I didn't want neighbors asking questions through the wall. I didn't want anybody from the station stopping by to see how I was doing. I didn't want to explain to my family why I was leaving Phoenix or what had happened in that bathroom. I wanted distance. Silence would have been good too. The application asked why I was interested in the position. I typed that I had experience working long shifts under difficult conditions and was comfortable with isolation. That was true enough. I didn't write that I couldn't sleep. I didn't write that my hands shook or that ambulances made my chest lock up. I didn't write about the boy. I sent the application and put the phone face down on the floor. A few hours later, they called me. I almost didn't answer. I watched the phone buzz beside the mattress until it stopped, then called back when I realized they might not try again. The conversation was short. They asked if I could start soon. "Yeah," I said. "I can start soon." They said they'd get back to me. They did. It took less than a week. I accepted the job without telling anybody. That part made me feel worse than I expected. My mother asked what I was doing with myself, and I told her I was figuring it out. One of my old coworkers sent a message asking if I was coming back. I looked at it for a long time and didn't answer. There wasn't anything I could say that wouldn't turn into a bigger conversation. I packed the rest of my things into the car. Most of it fit in the trunk. The rest went on the passenger seat in grocery bags. I left the furniture, I left the dishes, I left the coffee maker. By the time I pulled out of the apartment lot, the sun was coming up, but Phoenix still looked gray. The buildings and parking lots had that flat early morning color, and the air was already starting to warm up. It would be hot later, hot enough that nobody would want to be outside unless they had to. I drove past the station on the way to the highway. I didn't plan that. The road just took me there. The ambulance bay was open. One of the rigs sat under the lights with its back doors closed. I couldn't see anybody around it, but I slowed down anyway. My hands started shaking on the steering wheel. My chest tightened. I kept driving. There were a lot of reasons I should have stopped. I could have gone in and said goodbye. I could have talked to somebody. I could have explained that I wasn't angry and they hadn't done anything wrong. I didn't do any of that. The highway was ahead of me. The city spread out on both sides, all concrete and signs and low buildings, the place I'd spent my whole life knowing how to get around. I put the phone in the holder. The accepted caretaker job was still open on the screen. I turned north onto the highway, leaving Phoenix behind me. The rest of the drive took 17 hours. I stopped for gas when I had to and ate whatever I could get through a window. Most of the time I stayed on the highway and watched the desert change around me. Phoenix gave way to smaller towns, then to long, empty stretches with nothing but fences and dry hills. I'd driven about 1,100 miles by the time I left the highway. The road to the preserve was gravel, not the smooth kind either. It was covered in loose stones and washboard ridges that rattled the car so hard my teeth clicked together. The road went on like that for 40 minutes. There wasn't any cell service. I kept checking anyway. The phone sat in the holder with one bar, then none, then one again for a few seconds before dropping back out. I wasn't expecting anybody to call. I just wanted to know I could call somebody if I needed to. That was probably the point of the place. The listing had called it remote. Remote was a word people used when they didn't want to say there was nothing around. The preserve gate came up around a bend. There was a metal sign on one side of it and a small gravel pullout on the other. A pickup was parked there with an older man standing beside it. He wore a faded cap and an old preserve jacket like the one I'd been given with the job. He had one hand resting on the open driver's door. I stopped beside him and lowered the window. He looked at me for a few seconds before he said anything. I figured he was deciding if I was the right person or just somebody who'd gotten lost. "You Trevor?" "Yeah." He nodded. "Ronnie Warner." He held out his hand through the window. I shook it. His grip was strong and dry. "Guess you made it." "Looks like it." He looked past me at the car. "That thing make the road all right?" "It made the road." "That ain't what I asked." "It still runs." Ronnie gave a short laugh. "Good enough. Pull through the gate and park by the cabin. I'll show you around before it gets dark." He opened the gate and swung it toward the fence. The hinges complained the whole time. I drove through and followed the road a short distance across the top of the plateau. The land opened up on both sides. There was sagebrush everywhere, low and gray-green, with black volcanic rocks scattered through it. Beyond the edge of the plateau was a wide, dry lake bed. It went on farther than I could see and had a pale, flat color that made it look like water from a distance. "That's the sink," Ronnie said from beside me. I hadn't heard him get back in his truck, but he was driving ahead of me now. He pointed toward the lake bed through his window. "Locals call it that. Don't know if it's got an official name." "What's it sink?" "Nothing that anybody's found." I didn't know if he was joking. He didn't look over to see if I believed him. The observation gate was farther along the road. It was a heavier metal gate set across the entrance to a dirt track that went toward the edge of the plateau. There were several low dome-shaped lights mounted on posts nearby. They were dark for now. Ronnie got out of his truck and walked over to them. "These are the light domes," he said. "You keep them low after sunset. Don't point them up. Don't leave them bright because you're in a hurry." "I can handle that." "I'm telling you because people say they can handle it and then they forget." He tapped one of the housings with his knuckles. It made a hollow sound. "You check permits at the observation gate. Most folks have them. If they don't, you send them back. You don't argue about it and you don't let them through because they drove a long way." "How many people come through?" "Depends on the night. Sometimes none." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a ring of keys. There were more keys than I expected. They hung from a metal clip and made a lot of noise when he moved. "At dusk, you lock this gate, every night. Check it twice if you have to." "Why twice?" "Because once is how you end up coming back out here in the dark, wondering if you locked it." That sounded like the kind of answer I'd been getting from people in emergency work for years. Don't do the thing wrong and then act surprised when it causes trouble. Ronnie led me back toward the cabin. It was an old wooden building set a little apart from the road. The boards had gone gray with age and the porch leaned slightly toward the ground. There was a chimney coming through the roof and a stack of split wood under a covered side area. The cabin looked smaller than it had in the pictures. That didn't bother me. I didn't need much room. I'd spent the last year sleeping in apartments where I could hear people through the walls and didn't know any of them. Ronnie unlocked the door and pushed it open. Inside, there was one main room with a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, and a wood stove near the back wall. A shelf held several kerosene lamps. There was a hand-crank radio sitting beside them. "Power comes and goes," Ronnie said. "Mostly goes. Use the lamps when you need light. Don't burn them all night." I brought a flashlight. "That works too." He picked up the radio and turned it over in his hands. "This is for when the weather gets bad or you need to hear from the station. Crank it for a minute before you turn it on." "Is there a regular radio signal?" "Sometimes." "What about a phone?" Ronnie looked at me. "No signal out here," he said. "You noticed that on the road." "Yeah." "Landline was taken out years ago. If you need me, drive to the gate and use the radio there. If that don't work, come into town." "How far is town?" "Alkany's about 30 miles. He said it like 30 miles wasn't very far. After the road I'd just driven, I wasn't sure I agreed. Ronnie gave me the keys. The metal clip was heavy in my palm. "That one's the cabin. This one's the storage shed. The little one is for the observation gate." "All right. You got any questions?" I looked around the room. There wasn't much to ask. The bed had a thin blanket folded at the foot. A coffee can sat beside the wood stove with kindling in it. Somebody had left a broom in the corner and a stack of canned food on the shelf. "Not right now." Ronnie nodded. "You'll think of some." He started back toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. "You listen. Keep the light domes low and lock the gate at dusk." "I will." He looked at me for another second. "Good." Then he went outside. I stood on the porch and watched him get back in his truck. He drove toward the gate without saying goodbye. A minute later, the truck disappeared down the gravel road and I was alone on the plateau. The sun was low by then. The sink had turned darker than the land around it, and the volcanic rock held what little light was left. I went to the observation gate and checked the lock, even though Ronnie had just told me to do it. Then I lowered the lights. It wasn't difficult. Each dome had a switch on the side and a metal cover that turned over the light. I kept them pointed down like he said. The ground around the gate lit up in small yellow circles. Beyond that, there was only sagebrush and the dark lake bed. I went back to the cabin and shut the door. There wasn't much to unpack. My clothes stayed in the bags. I set the phone on the table and looked at the blank screen. No bars, no messages. Phoenix was 1,100 miles away, and there wasn't a way to call anybody from there. That was part of why I'd taken the job. I lit one kerosene lamp and turned it down low. The room filled with a weak yellow light. I put a piece of wood in the stove but didn't start it. The cabin wasn't cold yet, and I didn't know how much wood I'd need through the night. I ate a can of soup without heating it. It tasted like salt and metal. Then I checked the lock on the door and lay down. I expected to sleep badly. Usually I did. I'd wake up with my hands shaking or my chest tight or some part of the last year waiting for me in the dark. That didn't happen. I slept for 11 hours without dreaming and without shaking. When I woke up, the lamp had gone out and sunlight was coming through the thin curtains. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my hands. They were steady. I stayed at the preserve. The next 4 days settled into a routine. I checked the permits at the gate in the afternoon, lowered the light domes before sunset, and locked the gate twice like Ronnie said. Most nights nobody came through. The few people who did usually had their permits ready and didn't want to talk much. They'd look at the sky, look at the gate, and then drive back toward town. I didn't think much of that at first. People who drove out to a dark sky preserve usually wanted to be left alone. I figured Alkeny was the kind of place where everybody had already said everything they needed to say. I drove into town on the 5th afternoon for supplies. The preserve sat on top of the plateau, and Alkeny was down below it, spread along the road in a small group of buildings. There were around 300 people there, maybe a little less. I didn't count them, but they had a way of ending up in the same few places. The gas station was one of those places. So was the church across the road and the diner next to it. People stood outside the station talking beside their trucks. A few sat on the church steps, even though the church was closed. The diner windows were bright in the afternoon sun, and I could see people moving around inside. Everybody looked over when I drove past, not in a rude way. Nobody pointed or waved me down. They just watched the supply vehicle go by with the same interest people gave a new dog or a loose animal. I'd been in town twice already, and they still hadn't gotten tired of looking. I parked beside the gas station and went inside. The place had 2 fuel pumps under a metal awning and a small store attached to the back. It smelled like gasoline, dust, and coffee that had been sitting on a burner too long. There were shelves with canned food, bottled water, motor oil, and the kind of snacks people buy when they're already halfway to somewhere else. A young woman stood behind the counter. She had dark hair pulled back and wore a canvas jacket over her work shirt. She looked up from a magazine when I came in. "You're Trevor, right?" "Yeah, I'm Kathleen." She said it like I was supposed to know who she was. Maybe I was. Ronnie had mentioned there was a clerk at the station who knew the preserve better than most people, but he hadn't given me her name. Or if he had, I'd forgotten it. "Ronnie said you worked here." "I do." She put the magazine down. "You need gas?" "Eventually. I'm here for supplies first." "Then you're in the right place. There's not much else." I picked up a basket and started filling it. Canned soup, bread, coffee, batteries. A few things that would keep in the cabin without needing a refrigerator. I wasn't sure when I'd come back again, so I bought more than I needed. Kathleen watched me put everything in the basket. "You planning on feeding a lot of people?" "Just me." "Then you bought enough for a while." I don't like running out. I know. She didn't say it in a way that sounded like she knew me. It was more like she knew the road and the job and what brought somebody to a position that far from town. I put another can of soup in the basket anyway. What's in town? I asked. Besides this, the church, and the diner. Not much. Hardware store, post office, a few houses. Any place to get tools? The hardware store. Does it stay open late? No. How late? 4 on weekdays, noon on Saturday. I looked at the clock over the door. It was past 4 already. That's useful. You can get most things here if you don't need anything complicated. She pointed toward a narrow shelf near the coffee machine. There were screwdrivers, work gloves, rope, flashlights, and a few tools in plastic packages hanging from hooks. I can handle simple. That's what most people say before they break something. I looked at her. She had gone back to the magazine. I haven't broken anything yet. Give it time. I paid for the supplies and carried them out to the vehicle. Kathleen followed me as far as the door, then stopped beneath the awning. How's the road to the sink? I asked. She looked past me toward the plateau. Which part? The road from the gate, the one that goes toward the lake bed. It's not a lake. Ronnie called it the sink. That's what people call it. She folded her arms. The road's fine if you know where it goes. It gets rough near the edge. Don't take a regular car out there unless you want to walk back. Have you been out there? I know the road better than most visitors. That wasn't an answer, but I didn't push her. Anything else I should know? About the road? About town? Kathleen looked at the people standing beside the pumps. They weren't looking at us anymore, or they were trying not to. People here don't like surprises. That seems reasonable. It's not always reasonable. She picked up the magazine from the counter. You'll figure it out. I took the supplies back to the cabin and returned to town a little later. I didn't need anything else. I just wanted something hot to eat that hadn't come out of a can. The diner was busier than it looked from outside. There were maybe a dozen people inside, spread between the booths and the counter. Most of them looked up when I came in. The waitress pointed me toward an empty booth without asking if I was waiting for anybody. I sat down and ordered coffee and a burger. Nobody said much while I ate. There was the sound of forks against plates and the old air conditioner running near the ceiling. A man at the counter was reading a newspaper, but he hadn't turned the page in several minutes. The afternoon outside was clear and bright. There wasn't a cloud anywhere above the plateau. From the diner windows, I could see the whole sky. I looked up through the glass. Sky must be incredible here at night, I said. The room went quiet. It didn't happen all at once. The waitress stopped pouring coffee. Somebody set a fork down. The man with the newspaper folded it once and left it on the counter. An old woman sitting near the window reached up and touched the small tin star pinned to her collar. I looked around the diner. Nobody was looking at me now. They were looking at the table or the floor or somewhere outside that wasn't the sky. What? I said. The door opened behind me. Ronnie came in and stood there with his cap in one hand. He looked at the people in the diner and then at me. Come outside. I left some money on the table and followed him out. The sun was still bright enough to make me squint. Ronnie walked a few steps away from the building before he turned around. What did I say about the sky? Nothing. Don't joke about it. I wasn't joking. You said it must be incredible. Yeah, it probably is. Ronnie stared at me. He had the same look he'd had at the preserve when he explained the light domes, like he'd already told me something important and was trying to decide how much trouble I'd cause by not understanding it. When the Aurora turns red, you stay indoors, he said, every light burning until dawn. Why? You don't look up. That's the rule. That's the rule. I looked toward the plateau. The sky was still blue and empty, No red light, no weather coming in. Even through a window? I asked. Even through a window. I laughed. I didn't mean to, but the whole thing sounded ridiculous when he said it out loud. Ronnie didn't laugh. It isn't optional, not for anyone living or working in Alkany. He put his cap back on and walked toward his truck. I watched Ronnie get into his truck and drive back toward the station. Kathleen was still standing under the awning. She had the magazine in one hand, but she wasn't reading it. She was looking at the road and then at me. "That was a bad question," she said. "I've asked worse." "Not here." I looked up at the sky. It was still blue. The sun was bright with no red anywhere above the plateau. It didn't look dangerous. It looked like every other afternoon I'd spent outside since getting to Oregon. "Why does everybody act like I'm going to set the town on fire if I mention the sky?" "You don't understand." "That's true." She folded the magazine shut. "I need a propane fitting." "Okay." "From the supply shed at the preserve." I waited for the rest of it. She didn't add anything. "You need me to get one?" "I need you to drive me there and then to my mother's house." "Why can't you drive?" "I don't have a vehicle here." That seemed like something she could have mentioned before I went out to the preserve, but I didn't say that. "What kind of fitting?" "For a small propane line. The one at the house cracked." "I might have one." "You've got a supply shed." "Yeah, that doesn't mean it has everything." "I know." She said it quickly enough that I figured she'd been waiting for me to argue. I unlocked the vehicle and she got in on the passenger side. The magazine stayed in her hand. The drive back to the preserve took 40 minutes. Kathleen didn't say much. She watched the plateau through the window and kept the magazine on her lap. Every once in a while, she rubbed the edge of it with her thumb. I parked beside the cabin and went to the supply shed. It was a small wooden building behind the cabin with shelves along both walls. Most of the shelves held things I hadn't needed yet. Spare lantern glass, tools, wire, batteries, bolts, and boxes with labels that had faded enough to be useless. The propane fittings were in a metal bin near the back. I found 3 of them. 2 were too large. The last one looked right. I held it up through the open shed door. "This one?" Kathleen looked at it from the vehicle. "Yeah, that's the one." I carried it over and got back behind the wheel. She put the fitting in the pocket of her jacket. "You can bring it back," I said. "I will." "Eventually is fine." She looked at me. "I said I will." I started the vehicle and followed the road down from the preserve. The afternoon had started to lose some of its heat. Alkany looked the same as it had earlier, with people outside the gas station and the church steps full of people who didn't seem to be going anywhere. Nobody waved when we drove past. Kathleen gave me directions through town and then onto a narrow road that ran between low houses and overgrown yards. There were no sidewalks. Most of the homes had porches with old chairs on them. A few had wind chimes hanging near the doors, but they hung still. "Your mother knows about the fitting?" I asked. "She knows I'm bringing it." "Does she know I'm coming?" "Yes." That would have been good to know. "She won't care." That's also good to know. The house was near the end of the road. It was a single-story place with pale siding and a porch that ran across the front. Kathleen got out before I'd finished turning around in the driveway. A woman opened the front door. She was older than Kathleen, with black hair streaked through with gray. She wore a dark cardigan and kept one hand beside the small tin star pinned to her collar. She looked at Kathleen first, and then at me. "Mom," Kathleen said, "this is Trevor." She considered me for a moment. "Trevor," she said. "Yeah." "I'm Scarlett." She stepped aside and let us into the house. The inside smelled like furniture polish and something cooking in the kitchen. There were framed pictures on the walls and a narrow table covered with mail. Kathleen took off her jacket and hung it beside the door. I stayed near the entry with my hands in my pockets. Scarlett looked at the fitting. Did you get the right one? Yeah, Kathleen said. She took it out and handed it over. Scarlett checked it without turning it around much. Then she set it on the table with the mail. You can pour him a drink, Kathleen said. Scarlett looked at her. It's 2 p.m. It's been that kind of day. Scarlett went into the kitchen. I heard a cabinet open and then the clink of glass. Kathleen stood beside the table and looked at one of the pictures on the wall. I moved farther into the room. There was a framed photograph on the mantel above the fireplace. It showed 9 teenagers standing beside a pickup truck. The picture had been taken at dusk. The sky behind them was a deep blue, and the truck headlights were on, making bright spots near the bottom of the frame. They were all grinning at the camera. Some had their arms around each other. One boy stood near the end of the group with his hands in his pockets and his head tilted slightly toward the others. That's Lee, Kathleen said. I looked at her. My brother. She said it without changing her voice. Her jaw was tight, though. She kept looking at the photograph. Scarlett came back with 3 glasses and a bottle. She poured whiskey into each glass. It wasn't a little either. She filled them close to the same level and put one in front of me. I looked at the glass. I'm working, I said. It's too early, Scarlett said, but it doesn't matter. She picked up her own glass and sat in a chair beside the fireplace. Kathleen didn't sit. She stayed near the mantel with her arms folded. Scarlett looked at the photograph. That was 11 years ago, she said. They were from the church youth group, 9 of them. They drove out to the sink to watch the Aurora. The red one? Scarlett nodded. It was supposed to be rare. They wanted to see it from the plateau. I looked again at the photograph. The kids looked too young to be driving anywhere alone, but they were standing beside 2 trucks. Or maybe the second one was out of frame. I couldn't tell. What happened? They left in the evening. By morning, all 9 were gone. Gone where? Nobody knows. Scarlett took a drink. Her hand didn't shake. They searched the sink and the roads around it. They searched the water. There were no bodies, no tracks, nothing that showed where they went. Maybe they left in another vehicle. They had 2 trucks. Somebody could have picked them up. There was no sign of that. She said it plainly. Scarlett pointed toward the photograph with one finger. Both trucks were left in a neat row. The doors were open. The headlights were burning. One of the radios was still on. What was it doing? Hissing static. The room was quiet for a moment. I could hear a clock somewhere behind me. Did the police investigate? Everyone investigated. That wasn't exactly an answer, but it was close enough. Scarlett touched the tin star at her collar. After Lee and the others disappeared, the town kept the rule. The lights and staying indoors. Keep every light burning. Don't look at the red Aurora. Because you think it took them? Scarlett looked at me. I know what happened to them. Kathleen's jaw tightened again. She didn't look at either of us. I had seen people build explanations around bad events before. Sometimes it was religion. Sometimes it was a person they could blame. Sometimes it was just a story that made the empty space easier to stand near. 9 teenagers disappeared and the town had made a rule about the sky. That didn't make the sky responsible. I drank the whiskey. It burned going down. Scarlett watched me set the glass back on the table. You'll keep the lights on, she said. Yeah. And you won't look up. I understand the rule. She didn't seem satisfied, but she didn't argue. Kathleen picked up the propane fitting from the table and handed it back to me. I can take that, I said. I'm coming with you. We left the house a few minutes later. The photograph stayed on the mantel, with Lee and the other 8 teenagers grinning beneath the darkening sky. Kathleen didn't say anything on the drive back. I didn't ask her to. I had nothing useful to say, and I still wasn't convinced by Scarlett's explanation. People disappeared. Trucks got left behind. Radios hissed static. I dropped Kathleen at the gas station and drove back up to the preserve alone. The sun was lower by then, and the road had turned orange in the light. I carried the propane fitting into the ranger cabin and set it inside. The next 2 days passed without much happening. I checked the gate, worked around the cabin, and tried not to think about the storm coming in. The alert Ronnie had shown me said within 2 nights. That was close enough that I started watching the sky even during the day, though there wasn't anything to see. Just blue above the plateau and the sink sitting out there below it like a dry lake. I was checking the gate at dusk when Ronnie's truck came up the road. He drove slower than usual and stopped crooked beside the gate. The driver's door opened and Ronnie climbed out, holding onto the side of the truck. He had his cap pulled low and moved like the ground wasn't where he expected it to be. I could smell the alcohol before he got close. "You been drinking?" I asked. "You listen," he said. He took another step and had to stop. His hand stayed on the truck. "I am listening." "The red light is the price of being seen." He'd said that before, or something close to it. This time he sounded tired, like he'd been carrying the words around for a long time and had finally gotten tired of them. I looked out toward the sink. The last daylight was fading off the lake bed. The lights were still off, and the road beyond the gate was empty. "Price of being seen by what?" Ronnie looked at me. His pale eyes were wet and unfocused, but there wasn't anything confused about his face. "The light looks back." I didn't say anything. "You look up, it finds you." "That's not an explanation." "No, it ain't." He rubbed one hand over his mouth. "It's what happens." His face had the same hard look as when he told me to lock the gate twice. "You knew I thought this was irrational," I said. "I know what you think." "Then why keep enforcing it?" "Because I sent them out there." He looked over my shoulder toward the dark edge of the plateau. "I sent them out there, and I'm responsible for every one of them." He'd said that too, back when I first arrived. I hadn't understood what he meant then. I still didn't understand all of it, but I understood the part about responsibility. Ronnie pushed away from the truck. "Come on." "Where?" "The cabin." He made it halfway to the door before he stopped and turned around. "You got lights ready?" "Yeah." "Keep them burning." "I know the rule." "You listen. Keep every light burning until dawn." He didn't wait for me to answer. I followed him inside. The cabin smelled like old wood and kerosene. Ronnie went straight to the wall beside the radio. There was a sheet of paper taped behind it where I hadn't noticed it before. The edges had gone yellow, and one corner had started to peel away from the wall. He pointed at it. "That came through the station." I leaned closer. The paper had a date at the top. May 16th, 2025. There were weather maps and blocks of printed text underneath. I didn't understand most of it. The important part was underlined in pen. A major solar storm was expected. The Aurora could reach as far south as eastern Oregon within 2 nights. "How old is this?" I asked. "Couple days." "Why didn't you show me before?" "I was going to." "When?" Ronnie looked at the paper. "Before now." That wasn't a good answer, but he was drunk and the room was getting dark, so I let it go. The alert said the storm could cause radio problems and power failures. It didn't say anything about a light finding people. It didn't say anything about 9 teenagers or open truck doors or a radio hissing static. "Will it be red?" I asked. "Could be." "And if it is?" "You stay inside." "I know." "You don't look up." "I know that too." Ronnie nodded. He sat at the side of the bed and put both hands on his knees. He looked older than he had that morning, though it had only been a few hours. "You should go home," I said. "This is home." "You know what I mean." He stared at the floor. I'm fine. He wasn't, but I didn't have a way to fix that. I added another piece of wood to the stove and turned on the lamp. Ronnie stayed there until it got fully dark. Then he stood up and walked outside without saying goodbye. I watched his truck go down the road. A little later, I saw the first green light above the horizon. It wasn't much, just faint bands behind the plateau that came and went when I moved my head. I lowered the blinds until there was only a narrow gap left near one side. Alkali was visible far below. Every occupied window had a light burning behind lowered blinds. The whole town looked shut in. I kept the cabin lights on and watched the green aurora through the gap in the curtain. It moved slowly across the sky. It looked like light through dirty water, though I've never seen dirty water that far up. Nothing happened. Most of the time, it just looked like waiting. The next day, Ronnie came back with the pickup loaded with batteries and kerosene cans. He replaced the old batteries in the radio and the lamps, then filled every can from the storage drum. He didn't talk much. The alcohol was gone from his face, but not from the way he moved. Storm's coming tonight? I asked. Could be tonight. Or tomorrow? Could be. He tightened the cap on the last can. You keep the lights burning either way. I will. He carried the cans into the shed. I put the new batteries on the shelf beside the radio and tried it once. It gave a burst of static and then went quiet. Kathleen arrived in the afternoon. I saw her vehicle coming up the road and went out to meet her. She pulled up beside the cabin and got out with the propane fitting in her hand. I brought this back, she said. You could have kept it. I said I'd bring it back. She handed it to me. I took it inside and set it on the table. Kathleen followed me in, but didn't sit down. She looked at the batteries and the kerosene cans stacked near the door. Ronnie's been getting ready, she said. Yeah. For the storm. Yeah. She looked toward the curtain. Has it started? Not the red one. That's not what I asked. The green showed up last night. Kathleen nodded. The town had obeyed the rule during faint green light too, even though nobody said the green was dangerous. I knew that because I'd watched every window close at the same time. I leaned against the table. Do you believe Lee was taken by the Aurora? She looked at me for a while before answering. I don't know. That's not what I asked. I know. She folded her arms. I don't call it supernatural. Okay. I don't call it anything. I don't have proof. But you think it might have happened? She looked out through the narrow gap in the curtain. The sky was clear for now. I've spent 11 years wanting to stand at the sink during a red aurora and see what Lee saw. She said it plainly. Kathleen, that's dangerous. I know. Do you? Her mouth tightened. I know the road to the sink better than most people. That's not the same thing. You don't understand. Look, I understand wanting an answer. I don't understand walking toward the thing that took 9 people. You don't know that it took them. No, I don't. But I know the rule exists to keep people alive. She looked down at the propane fitting on the table. The rule has only kept us from finding out whether Lee is still somewhere beneath the sky. I didn't have anything useful to say to that. She'd been carrying those 11 years around longer than I'd been in town. I didn't expect one warning from me to make them lighter. The storm's coming, I said. You stay home when it does. She looked at me. I will. All night. I said I will. You keep the lights on and you don't look up. I know the rule. I believed her. I didn't know if I believed the rule, but I believed Kathleen when she said she would stay home. She went back outside and got into her vehicle. I stood beside the cabin and watched her turn around near the gate. The engine sounded rough for a few seconds before settling down. Not much happened the next day. Ronnie stayed in town and I worked around the preserve, checked the batteries, and made sure the lamps were where I could reach them. The sky stayed clear most of the afternoon, but it had a strange brightness to it. Not brighter than usual, exactly. More like there was too much light behind it. By dusk, I went down to lock the overlook gate. The road was empty. The sink sat beyond the gate in the fading light, flat and dark and too far away to make out much of anything. I checked the lock twice, the way Ronnie had told me to, and pulled on it to make sure it held. That was when I noticed Kathleen's truck wasn't at the gas station. The station was below the preserve and off to the side of the main road. I could usually see the roof and the lights from the gate. Ronnie's truck was there, parked crooked near the pumps. A couple of other vehicles sat beside the building. Kathleen's wasn't one of them. I stood there looking down at the station. It was possible she'd taken it home. It was possible she'd driven into town for something. There were plenty of explanations that had nothing to do with the sink. I didn't believe any of them. The first red showed up above the plateau while I was still standing there. It came through the last of the daylight in a thin band, almost pink at first, then darker. It moved across the sky like a reflection on water. Only there wasn't any water up there. I headed back to the cabin. I had just reached the door when somebody started pounding on it. Not knocking, pounding. 3 or 4 hits at a time, then a pause, then more. I opened it and found Scarlett standing there in her cardigan with one hand braced against the frame. Her hair had come loose around her face and she was breathing hard. Trevor. Scarlett. Let me in. I stepped aside. She came through the door and turned around right away, looking past me toward the windows. Did you drive here? I asked. I walked from the road. That didn't explain how she got up the road, but she was already looking at the lamps. Where's Kathleen? Scarlett reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it out to me. She left this on the kitchen table. I took it and opened it. The note was short. Kathleen had written that she was going to the sink. She was going to see what had taken Lee. There wasn't anything else on it. No directions, no time she'd be back, no part where she admitted this was a bad idea and decided to stay home after all. How long ago? I asked. She was gone when I got home. How long? I don't know. Maybe an hour, maybe more. Did you try calling her? There is no signal at my house. There isn't one here either. I know. She looked at the note in my hand. Her face was controlled, but her mouth had gone tight. I told her not to go, she said. I told her the storm was coming. She knew. She said she had to see. I looked toward the window. The red light had spread across more of the sky. The blinds were down, but the edges of the room had started to change color. The cabin was still lit by the lamps. Every lamp. The stove light, the desk lamp, the lantern near the door. I thought about the rule. Keep every light burning. Don't look up. I also thought about Kathleen driving out there alone. How far is she? Scarlett asked. I don't know. You know the road. Yeah. Then go get her. Scarlett made it sound simple, like I'd asked her for the weather and she'd given me the answer. I can't take the vehicle out there after dark. Why not? Because of the rule. The rule kept Lee there for 11 years. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I looked back at the note. There were no other vehicles at the station that I could see from the cabin. Ronnie wasn't there. There was no way to call the county, and even if I could get a signal somewhere, I didn't know how long it would take anybody to reach the preserve. Kathleen had already made it to the sink or was on the road toward it. Waiting for help wasn't a plan. It was just another way of leaving her out there. You should stay here, I said. Scarlett stared at me. Keep the lights on, I said. Don't look outside. You're going after her. Yeah. Then I am coming. No. I know the road to the sink. I know it too. You don't understand what you're going to find. Look, I don't know what I'm going to find. That's why I'm going. She touched the tin star on her collar. Kathleen is my daughter. I know. Then don't tell me to stay here while you go after her. I didn't have a good answer for that. I wanted her inside the cabin where I could keep track of her. I also knew I couldn't carry both of them back if something went wrong, and I didn't know what something going wrong would look like yet. I'll bring her back, I said. She held my gaze for a few seconds. You keep the lights burning. I will. And you don't look up. I know the rule. She nodded once, like that was the closest thing to permission I was going to get. I grabbed the lantern from beside the door and turned the wick up. The flame jumped and threw a yellow circle across the floor. I checked the vehicle before getting in. The fuel was above half a tank. The headlights worked. There was a blanket in the back and a tool kit under the seat. I took the lantern with me and set it on the floor beside my leg. Scarlett stood in the cabin doorway. Trevor. I looked at her. Bring Kathleen home. Yeah, I said. I will. I got in and started the vehicle. The engine turned over on the second try. I kept the headlights pointed down at the road and drove away from the cabin. The preserve road was rough in places, but I knew where the worst parts were. I learned that during my first week, back when Kathleen had told me not to take a regular car toward the edge. The vehicle bounced hard over the washouts, and the lantern knocked against my boot every few seconds. The red light kept building ahead of me. I didn't look straight at it. I watched the road and the dark ground on either side. The red still came through the windshield anyway, filling the cab with a color that made the dashboard look wet. I passed the gate and kept going. The road narrowed as it dropped toward the sink. The last of the preserve lights disappeared behind me. There was no phone signal and nobody else to call. I had the lantern, the vehicle, and the road I knew. That would have to be enough. I turned the vehicle off the preserve road toward the final stretch of the sink, with the lantern beside me and the red storm building ahead. The track dropped onto the dry lake bed and the red light got worse. It filled the windshield until the headlights were hard to see. They were still on. I could see the beams hitting the cracked ground a few feet ahead, but everything past that was red. The sky, the dust, the low hills around the sink. All of it had the same deep color. I drove slower. The lake bed wasn't flat in the way a parking lot was flat. It had ridges and shallow dips and cracks running through the white dirt. Some of the cracks were only an inch wide. Some were wide enough to catch a tire. I kept both hands on the wheel and watched for the dark places. Then I saw Kathleen's truck. It was parked about 100 yards ahead of me with the driver's door open. The headlights were burning straight into the red. The radio was making a harsh burst of static that came and went in uneven waves. That was the same sound Scarlett had described. I stopped the vehicle and left the engine running. The lantern sat on the floor beside my leg, but I left it there. There was enough light out there. Too much light. Kathleen was standing farther out on the lake bed with her face tilted toward the sky. Kathleen! She didn't move. I opened the door and ran. The ground was rough beneath my boots. The white crust broke apart when I stepped on it and sharp pieces kicked up around my ankles. I kept my eyes on her and tried not to look above the level of her head. Kathleen, stop looking up. She didn't answer. You have to come back now. We need to get to the trucks. The red light moved across the sky in long, slow ripples. The red light moved across the sky in long, slow ripples, as if something beyond it were stirring it. Every time the color shifted, I thought I saw a darker shape inside it, but I couldn't tell if that was real or just my eyes trying to make sense of too much light. I ran harder. Kathleen was crying. I could see it even from a distance. Her arms hung at her sides and her face stayed pointed up. Kathleen! This time she looked at me, but only for a second. Then she looked back above her. He's up there. she said. I could hear her over the radio static. Her voice sounded thin and broken. Who? I can feel him. Lee isn't up there, look at me. Lee is up there. She said his name like she was trying to make me understand something that was obvious to her. I didn't understand it. I understood that she was standing in the middle of the sink under a red sky with no vehicle between her and whatever was happening above us. That was enough. I reached her and grabbed her arm. Come on. She pulled against me. Not hard at first. She just stopped moving, like her feet had settled into the lake bed. Kathleen, we have to go. He's there. Yeah, I heard you. We're leaving anyway. I pulled her toward the trucks. She took one step and then twisted around to look at the sky again. The red stopped moving. It didn't fade. It didn't turn off. The ripples just stopped where they were, stretched across the sky in long bands that hung over the sink. Then the light began to fold. It came down in slow columns. They poured from the red bands and reached toward the lake bed without spreading out. The first one touched down maybe 50 feet to our left. It stood upright and kept its shape. It was a tall shape made from red light. It had something like shoulders and a head, but no face, no eyes, no mouth, nothing to tell you where it was looking. A low tone started up around us. It wasn't loud. I could hear the radio static over it, but I felt the tone in my teeth and in the bones behind my ears. It made my jaw tighten until it hurt. Another column came down behind Kathleen, then another one near the trucks. The light touched a patch of sage beside us. The plant turned gray almost at once. Its leaves curled up and broke apart in the wind, even though there wasn't any wind. Kathleen made a sound that was almost a sob. The shapes started drifting toward us. They didn't walk. They moved without lifting anything that could have been a foot. Their outlines bent and straightened as they crossed the lake bed. There was no dust around them, no sound except that tone vibrating through my teeth. I pulled Kathleen back. Move. She stayed where she was. Kathleen, move. One of the shapes separated from the red around it. The column narrowed and leaned forward, then widened again at the shoulders. Its head was smaller than the others. The body was thinner. Kathleen cried out, Lee. The figure stood between her and the other shapes. It had the shape of the person in the old photograph on Scarlett's mantle, but it was made of light. It was lean and young. There was no face. I couldn't see any clothes, just the shape of a teenage boy with his arms held out slightly from his sides. The low tone changed when it appeared. It got higher for a moment and then dropped back down. The figure pointed at Kathleen, then it pointed behind her. Go, I said. Kathleen shook her head. Tears were running down her face. Lee, no. The figure moved closer to the other shapes. It didn't turn around. It kept one arm stretched toward Kathleen and the other held out toward the red columns. I pulled her again. She fought me this time. Not because she wanted to hurt me. She just didn't want to leave him. Kathleen, he's telling you to go. You don't know that. Look at what he's doing. Lee, come on. One of the taller shapes drifted toward the boy. It bent over him without touching him, its red outline flowing down like smoke. The boy's shape got dimmer. Kathleen sobbed and tried to step toward him. I wrapped both hands around her arm and pulled her back. She stumbled against me. Stop it. You're going to get yourself killed. Lee is there. I know. You don't understand. No, I don't. But I'm still taking you out of here. The boy-shaped light pushed one arm farther toward the other figures. The tone pressed against my teeth until I could barely stand it. The red around him started thinning. His shoulders stretched out. His whole body became narrow as a strip of cloth pulled tight between two hands. Kathleen stopped fighting. I dragged her toward the trucks. We moved badly. She kept looking back and tripping over the cracked ground. I had one hand around her arm and the other against her back. The truck was still a long way off, though it had looked closer when I first arrived. Distance does that at night. It makes everything look near until you need to cross it. "Keep moving," I said. She was crying too hard to answer. The boy-shaped figure grew thinner behind us. The other shapes had stopped moving forward. They stood around him in a loose line, all of them faceless and red. Then his arm dropped. The shape broke apart. It stretched into long pieces that pulled backward toward the red sky. For a second there was still a boy standing there, thin as a reflection in disturbed water. Then that broke too. The light retreated across the lakebed behind us as we reached the trucks. The red light came back before we could get either truck moving. It had pulled away from us for a few seconds, sliding across the lakebed toward the other side of the sink. Then it stopped and came forward again. This time it moved fast. The red bands above us brightened, and the columns started stretching across the ground like they were reaching for something. Kathleen was still beside me. She was crying and looking back toward where Lee had disappeared. "We have to go," I said. "I know." "Get in the truck." She didn't move. The radio in her truck crackled again. The sound came through the open driver's door and mixed with the low tone that was still vibrating in my teeth. I could see the headlights shining into the red, but they didn't reach far enough. The beams just turned red and disappeared. I grabbed Kathleen by the shoulders. "Get in. He's gone." "I know. Lee is gone." "I know. Get in the truck." She looked at me then, not at the sky, not behind me. Her face was wet and dirty, and there was a streak of white dust across one cheek. I pushed her toward the door beside the steering wheel. That's when another set of headlights appeared behind us. For a second, I thought the red had made another shape. The lights came over the lake bed in a rough, bouncing line and grew brighter as the vehicle got closer. The engine sounded like it was being pushed too hard. It came straight toward us with both headlights on. Ronnie's truck dropped into one of the shallow ruts and hit hard enough that the front end bounced. The door beside the steering wheel opened before it had fully stopped. Ronnie climbed out with one of the cabin lamps in each hand. A flare gun was tucked under his arm. The lamps were the same ones we'd kept burning in the cabin. Their glass chimneys shook as he walked. He'd brought the light with him. I couldn't tell if that was part of the rule or if he'd run out of better ideas. "You listen," he said. He set the lamps down beside his truck. The red light was moving toward us across the ground. It was less than 100 yards away now. "Ronnie, what are you doing here?" "Get the girl back to Alkany." He picked up the flare gun and checked it. His hands weren't shaking. Mine were. "You're coming with us." "I ain't." "Ronnie." "Get her in the truck." Kathleen stood beside me. She looked at Ronnie and then at the lake bed. "You broke the rule," she said. Ronnie looked at her. "I know." "You came out here." "I know where I came." The red shapes kept moving. There were more of them now. I could count 6 or 7, maybe more behind those. They weren't walking, but they crossed the lake bed in a steady line. The ground around them turned gray. One of the low shrubs near the truck curled in on itself and blew away. Ronnie took a step away from us. "Get the girl back to Alkany," he said again. "I can get her back. You can come too." "No. That's not how this works." "I know how it works." He walked toward the red shapes. Kathleen tried to follow him. I caught her arm. "Don't!" "Ronnie." He didn't turn around. "Ronnie, stop." He kept walking. The lamps stayed behind him on the ground. Their yellow light was small and weak against the red, but it made 2 circles in the dust around the truck. I pulled Kathleen back toward the cab. She fought me for a second. "He can't stay out there," she said. "He knows that." "Then why is he doing this?" I didn't have an answer. Ronnie had spent years keeping people away from the sink. He'd told us to lower the lights and lock the gate and never look up. Now he was walking toward the things he'd been warning us about. He stopped about halfway between us and the red columns. Then he looked up. I couldn't see his face clearly from where I was standing, but I knew what he was doing. I knew because every rule in town had been built around not doing it. The red light spread over his jacket and cap. The air around him filled with that low, vibrating tone. It was louder now. I could feel it in my jaw. "I sent them out there," Ronnie said. His voice carried across the lake bed. It sounded rough but clear. "I told them the red sky was safe." Kathleen went still beside me. Ronnie kept looking up. The red bands moved above him and the columns shifted around him. None of them had reached him yet. "I told them to go see it." "Ronnie," I said. He didn't look at me. "I am responsible for Lee Griffin and the other 8. Kathleen choked back a sob. She covered her mouth with one hand. Ronnie lowered the flare gun to his side. The red light behind him had gotten brighter. It wasn't just above the lake bed anymore. It was on the ground and around the trucks and shining through the windows. "Get in the truck," I said. Kathleen didn't answer. "Kathleen, get in." Ronnie stood there without running. He could have come back. The road was behind him and the trucks were right there. He could have gotten in the passenger seat and let me drive him out. I don't know if he thought the light would follow us or if he just didn't believe he deserved to leave. The columns closed around him. One came down to his left. A column came down at his back. Then 2 more folded out of the red above the lake bed and stood on either side of him. The shapes were taller than Ronnie and had no faces. They leaned toward him without touching the ground. Ronnie still didn't move. I shoved Kathleen into the truck. She hit the seat with her knees and grabbed the door frame. "Trevor!" "I'm getting you out." "I can't leave him." "You have to." I slammed the door and ran around to the other side. The engine was still off. I climbed in and turned the key. It clicked once, then again. "Come on." The red filled the windshield. Ronnie was only a dark shape in the middle of it now. I tried the key again and the engine turned over. It caught hard and shook the whole truck. Kathleen reached for the door handle. I grabbed her wrist. "Don't!" "Ronnie!" The columns reached him. The red shapes bent inward all at once. Their bodies stretched and narrowed around him. The light went so bright I had to look down at the dashboard. The low tone climbed higher, and the truck windows started vibrating. I put the vehicle in reverse and backed away without looking up. The tires spun on the dry crust. Dust came up behind us and the headlights jumped over the ground. I turned hard and headed toward the preserve road. Kathleen was crying beside me. I kept one hand on the wheel and watched the road ahead. The cabin lamps were still burning in the back of the vehicle. Their yellow light slid over the ceiling every time we hit a rut. Behind us, the red light lifted off the lake bed. It pulled upward in long strips and folded back into the sky. The columns went with it. The color thinned as it rose, leaving the ground dark again except for the truck's headlights. I looked back once. Ronnie was no longer visible on the lake bed. I turned the vehicle toward Alkany as the red light folded back into the sky behind us. It took about 4 hours for the red light to disappear completely. By dawn on May 18th, 2025, I had swung the vehicle around and driven back to the sink with Kathleen beside me. Neither of us had said much. We had nothing useful to say about what we'd seen, and saying Ronnie's name didn't change where he was. The lake bed was still. The red was gone from the sky. The white ground looked gray in the early light, and the sage along the edges had frost on it. Every plant was silvered over. The air had that cold, dry smell it gets before the sun comes up, though the truck's windows were warm from the heater. I stopped near the place where we'd left Ronnie. There was no sign of him. No jacket, no flare, no red-lit figure stood in the middle of the sink. Just the cracked ground and the short shadows of the sage. Kathleen got out first. She stood beside the truck and looked over the lake bed. "Ronnie," she said. Her voice carried farther than it should have in that open space. It went out over the white dirt and came back as nothing. I walked a little way from the truck. The frost broke under my boots. I kept looking at the ground, though I didn't see much. A few dark marks ran across the crust near where he'd been standing. They could have been tire tracks or cracks or something the light had done to the dirt. I didn't know. One truck was parked near the far side of the lake bed with its cab door open. Its headlights were dead. The battery must have run down. The inside of the cab was dark and empty. Kathleen walked toward it, but I caught her by the arm. "Don't." She looked at me. "He could be in there." "He isn't." "You don't know that." I did know it, not because I had seen anything. I just knew Ronnie wasn't sitting in that truck with the door open waiting for us to find him. There are some things you don't have to check. She pulled free and went to the truck anyway. She looked inside, then around the back, then under the open door as if he might have fallen there. I stayed where I was and watched the horizon. The sky was pale over the hills. There was no red in it, no bands, no movement. After a few minutes, Kathleen shut the truck door. "We should take it," she said. "Which one?" "Ronnie's." I looked at the truck. "We can't leave yours out here." "I don't care about mine." "I do." She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. The dust on her cheeks spread into a gray streak. "He's gone." "Yeah." "You're just going to say that?" "I don't know what else to say." She looked at the lake bed again. "He went out there because of us. He went out there because of what he did. That's not better." "No." We got into the vehicle and drove back toward Alkany. Kathleen sat with both hands in her lap and kept her eyes on the road. I didn't ask if she was all right. She wasn't, and neither was I. Asking would only make us lie or stop talking altogether. Scarlett was waiting when we reached her house. The front door opened before I had shut off the engine. She came down the steps in her cardigan with the tin star fastened to her collar. Her eyes went to the seat beside me first. Then she looked toward the road behind me. The abandoned truck was visible from there. It sat near the turnoff with its cab door closed now and the dead headlights pointed at nothing. Scarlett didn't ask where Ronnie was. She already knew. Kathleen got out and walked to her. Scarlett put both hands on her daughter's face and looked her over. She checked Kathleen's arms and shoulders and turned her slightly to see the dirt on her clothes. Kathleen stood still and let her do it. "Are you hurt?" Scarlett asked. "No." "Did he come back?" Kathleen shook her head. Scarlett closed her eyes for a second. She touched the star at her collar. Then she pulled Kathleen against her. I stayed beside the vehicle while they held on to each other. I felt tired enough that my legs were starting to shake. The sun was coming up behind the house, turning the windows yellow. It was an ordinary morning. That was the worst part of it. Scarlett looked over Kathleen's shoulder at me. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. I was going to. "Back to Phoenix?" "Yeah." Kathleen turned around. "You can't." I looked at her. "I can." "You don't understand what happens if nobody watches the gate." "I understand. Ronnie did it for years." "Ronnie did a lot of things for years." She tightened her jaw. "You can't just leave." I had to think about it. I had spent most of my life leaving places once the work was done. That was how I got through emergency shifts and bad calls and everything else. You did what you could. Then you went somewhere. The next problem couldn't find you. The problem with Alkany was that it didn't work that way. The gate was still there. The lamps were still there. The people in town still needed somebody to tell them to stay inside when the sky changed. Ronnie had carried that responsibility until he couldn't carry it anymore. "I'll stay," I said. Kathleen stared at me. Scarlett looked down at the tin star. "You don't have to." "Yeah, I do." That was the closest thing I had to an explanation. It wasn't enough for either of them, but it was what I had. The next few days were quiet. I took Ronnie's truck back to the station and left mine at the preserve. The abandoned vehicle was brought in later. Nobody asked me to do that. There wasn't anybody left to ask. I kept the gate locked at dusk. I checked the lamps and lowered the domes. I learned which batteries needed replacing and which hinges stuck when the weather got cold. People in Alkeny started looking to me when they wanted to know if the sky was safe. I didn't tell them it was safe. I told them to stay inside. I started sleeping badly again. I woke up with my chest tight and my hands shaking, sometimes hearing the low tone in the room, even though there was nothing there. On clear nights, I stayed awake and watched the horizon through the blinds. Whenever the Aurora came south, the people of Alkeny turned on every light in their houses. They stayed indoors. Nobody looked up. I did the same thing at the preserve. One clear night, I walked through the rooms of the ranger cabin and checked the windows. The desk lamp was on. The stove light was on. The lantern by the entrance was burning low, so I turned the wick up and watched the flame steady itself. Outside, the town lights were spread below the preserve in small yellow squares. Every occupied window was lit. It reminded me of a row of candles, though I wouldn't have said that to anyone. Candles burned down. These lights needed to stay on. I pulled the blinds down, leaving only a thin strip of window showing. Then I stood there with my hands at my sides and watched the dark strip below the glass. The sky above it was hidden,